So I checked the calendar, and it has officially been 1 year since I have had what I'm referring to as Fauci nose. And it is, for everyone listening, it is, what's it called technically? Parosmia? Do you
Yeah,
remember?
that sounds right.
Can you
It's
look
not
at...
parasomnia because that's like sleepwalking.
Hold on. Parosmia. Yeah, parosmia is a distorted sense of smell. It happens when smell receptor cells in your nose don't detect odors or transmit them to your brain. Causes include bacterial or viral infections, head trauma, neurological conditions, and COVID-19. I got COVID when I was pregnant, 27 weeks pregnant, and at the time, it was asymptomatic for me. I was not vaccinated. I'm still not vaccinated, but I didn't have any symptoms. But then like 2 months after I had it, I was still pregnant at the time, and I developed this parosmia.
I don't know if this is my brain fog from having COVID around the same time, but the timeline's messed up in my head.
Why?
You were pregnant with the baby when you had COVID?
Yeah.
Dang.
What?
I know he's turning 1 next month, so okay. So then the anniversary makes sense.
Yeah. So, but a couple months later, this cropped up, and it forces itself into everyday conversations. It's annoying because every time we try and go out with someone or we visit someone's house for dinner or something, like I can only eat certain foods and drink certain drinks. Alcohol, pretty much all of it tastes like, what do I say? Sweaty socks?
Yeah, gym socks.
And I've heard other people who have gotten this from COVID-19. My uncle has had it for 2 years. I've just had it for 1. But, or maybe, no, he would be coming up on 3 years because he was one of the first people in Kansas City to actually get COVID-19.
Yeah, I remember when they had it, it was almost like the local news was waiting to see when they would die kind of thing. And they're both fine.
And we're like, oh my God, that's my aunt.
Yeah.
So he still has it. And I have tried to cure mine with, everything under the sun. I've tried black seed oil is one thing that like the homeopathic ladies have suggested I've tried. I've tried anti-inflammatory measures like turmeric tea. All of the stuff. And you heard of somebody who paid like $1,000 for a steroid shot to decrease inflammation?
Yeah, there have been tons of things like that have been treatments for other things that they found might help with lingering COVID symptoms. Reminds me of how Viagra was originally a heart medication and they discovered other side effects.
Is that why they say ask your doctor if you're healthy enough for sex on those commercials?
Probably. No, but your Fauci nose is unpredictable too. It's not like you know what foods are going to be gross or what to avoid. You don't like a lot of the non-dairy alternatives that I eat because of how it smells, but it changes from day to day. It's not even a consistent thing.
I worked for months to try and at least identify a variable that would be a trigger. And the only thing that I've been able to narrow down as a general rule is that the lesser processed foods have a lower likelihood that they will taste like socks. So for me, non-processed foods generally taste better. And when I say better, I mean true to their natural taste, because so like you have an anaphylactic reaction to milk protein casein.
I've heard both. It's one of those words I only read.
So, and I'm not trying to be like a one-upper here, but at least you've never tasted, I don't know, Tillamook vanilla bean ice cream.
That's true.
But I know exactly what that tastes like. And just a year and a half ago, I was eating it and it was delicious. And now I can't have it. I'm an addict.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Shakespeare. I should probably Google this before I record it. But what's the phrase? Better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And now all you can do is feed Tillamook to a picky toddler who's going to throw it on the floor.
Right. And they don't understand the value, but that's one of the scariest aspects. So how long am I going to have this? Is this forever? Which brings me to my next question for you, since this is what you do all day and this is what you're good at. Can I sue the government for damages? Because there's another report now, 3 years later, that's saying, of course, COVID-19 was a lab leak. The Department of Energy, which is weird. Why are they making these reports?
This one specifically because they do a lot of the monitoring for international labs. So they have some expertise looking at these kinds of questions.
Okay, so this report seems to confirm that this was COVID-19 leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China.
I don't want to pour cold water on you, but this one seems to be at least equal to the strongest findings, saying that it was a lab leak versus a natural evolution. They said they concluded with moderate confidence that it came from the lab and not the wet market.
I mean, moderate confidence is enough for me. Any ounce of confidence that confirms my priors is what I want to believe.
Right. I was reading the New York Times write-up of this story this morning, and they were quick to add that other intelligence agencies have more confidence in the natural evolution theory of COVID-19 and that there's no consensus yet at the federal level about where COVID-19 came from.
But this isn't the first report either that has confidence in lab leaks. So there are conflicting reports.
That's right. I think there's another one that had moderate confidence. It might have come from the FBI.
It did. It came from the intelligence agencies. And this was, I think, like late 2021, when it was still kind of like, I don't know, can we say this in public?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the ongoing debate is now, well, now that they're admitting it, it seems like at the time they were taking active measures to suppress people who were theorizing that that's where COVID came from.
Definitely.
So what do you do now?
Right. So let's just assume that it was leaked from a lab, the lab in Wuhan, China specifically, because there's an article from Politico that talks about how not once, but multiple times there were like, I don't know what you would call them, auditors, people from the federal government who would go over to this lab in Wuhan, China. They visit all labs where there is research ongoing that is partially or fully funded by American taxpayer dollars. And they conduct audits and they make sure that the researchers are abiding by all biosafety measures.
Yeah, safety inspectors.
And not once, but multiple times, these inspectors went to this lab in Wuhan, China, and flagged safety concerns. One of these people went so far as to bring these concerns to like several superiors, and those concerns were completely ignored. And I think that's almost verbatim the headline of this Politico piece.
Yeah, so your question is, does that open them up to any liability?
So I'm saying if American taxpayers were funding federal grants that went to, what is it?
The Eco Health Alliance.
The Eco Health Alliance that was conducting experiments to see how to make COVID-19, SARS-2, more deadly and more contagious, which is what they admitted that they were doing with their grant money, which was already on the borderline of what was acceptable in the parameters of the grant. So if we knew that they were doing this and that we knew that there were safety measures being violated, and then we kept permitting the experiments regardless, and then there was a leak, it spread across the globe, it made people sick, and now I have ongoing damages to my life. Can I sue the federal government?
The shortest answer is I don't know for sure, but most likely not.
So I'm thinking about this in the context of the people in Ohio. If and when there will be federal investigations into what went on there, and if some of the blame can be placed at an agency of the federal government, can those people whose children are experiencing rashes and vomiting and they're all falling ill, and that's probably just the least of it, we have yet to discover the rest. When and if there's any fault, can they sue for damages?
It's a good question, but a lot of times, and we've talked about this in the context of vaccines, in exchange for taking on a public role, like developing a vaccine quickly using public funding, they'll often get liability shields that come with that. And so I don't know what arrangement applies specifically to gain-of-function research or railroad transportation. Railroads are one of the first regulated industries, so the first big regulatory body was made to oversee the railroads. There's got to be carve-outs for things like that. Oftentimes you'll have requirements where Congress will say, okay, rail line, depending on what kind of cargo you're hauling and if you're going interstate or whatever, you have to put so much money aside for when there's an accident like this so that you have this fund, this pool of monies to make people whole whenever you harm them. I don't know if that applies in this case, and I don't know who would be eligible for it. One of the biggest problems when you're talking about a harm like this is limiting the class of people who would then be able to get compensation, right? So this all revolves, this debate in the legal community is called who has standing to sue. You've heard this probably in the headlines talking about who has the legal authority to challenge Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. Most people talk about it in terms of having a particularized injury, because even if you're inconvenienced by someone or something, this program, so to talk about student loans, if spending this up to $1 trillion makes inflation worse, that makes all of us worse off, but that is not enough of a particularized harm to give us a right to sue, even if Congress had given us that right. So taking a step back, you have to have a legal right to go to court before you can go to court. You can't just say, I'm injured, therefore I can go to court. It has to all be done under law. So if there's no provision that says, if this happens to you, you can go and sue and get justice, you probably can't.
I guess the logical end of that, too, is if I can sue because COVID-19 gave me Fauci knows, then how many families could sue because COVID-19 killed their loved ones?
Well, yeah, or made you lose time from work because the schools were closed, right, or you lost a job, or had a vaccine requirement.
Or your business closed because of lockdowns, right?
Right. So who's responsible for that? You're making me think back to con law class going on a decade ago, but you have these theories of who's responsible, and it can get really big really fast. There was a famous tort case about a woman who was standing at a train platform, and there was an anarchist carrying dynamite, and he was running to get onto a train, presumably to blow it up, and he tripped and dropped the package when someone tried to help him onto the train as it was leaving. I think I'm remembering the facts right. He drops the dynamite on the tracks, it explodes, and part of the train platform falls and hits this lady on the head, and I think she's blinded. And then she sues the train or the rail station, saying it was their fault. And I'm pretty sure she was made whole and they were held liable. But it's like, it's the anarchist's fault, obviously. He had the illegal dynamite. But yeah, these questions.
Wait, this was a real case, not like some hypothetical?
Yeah, that was a real case around the turn of the 20th century. And I wish I could remember all the details. I think her name was Helen Palsgraf. That sticks in my mind. But yeah, our legal system's weird.
You can't remember when our baby was born, but you can remember Helen Palsgraf's name.
No, I know his birth. Yes. That was a little convoluted. I should probably say that better. Can you sue? Probably not. Because Congress makes a bunch of carve-outs for particular industries, situations, and one like COVID where it affects everybody, they're probably not going to let even you who can say this research contributed to this illness that I'm now having to deal with years later. It's not direct enough, I would say. Or else the class, so
I would let them go and dig up in my nose, my sinus cavities or whatever, and try and go and identify the particles and link it to COVID if I have to.
Yeah, and maybe saying particularized isn't the right word here. That's just the term. I'm not a lawyer. Don't hold me to this. We should probably interview Trey, my old roommate, who does this kind of law.
Oh, yeah. We'll call Trey.
But and you've heard of things like class action lawsuits, but in this case, the class would be everybody. And I know in other contexts, like when the government spends money or goes to war and does things we don't like, we're not allowed to sue just as a taxpayer or as a citizen because it's not particularized enough. If this harmed everybody.
I get the distance there. I understand that. You can't sue because you oppose a particular policy. But for the people in Ohio, what if someone dies, which eventually they will? Like if you have a newborn who dies because he was drinking formula that was put in tap water that's full of acid and runoff from the chemicals that were burned as a result of the EPA's decision, and let's just say they do some audit and turns out that was the worst decision that they could have made to handle the cleanup of that chemical spill. Someone was in a position to know better, and that was a particular thing that killed that infant, was the exposure to that chemical.
So there are all these threads I'm trying to pull out as I'm listening to you. Who's responsible legally for that baby getting sick? Was it the mom who chose to make formula with the tap water instead of bottled water?
Our tap water is supposed to be safe. City officials, county officials, state officials are supposed to oversee that. I agree that it's not. Then before now, we should have had this, discussion before now.
Well, I'm trying to remember the details. Didn't they tell them not to drink the water? Maybe we don't have to focus on that example, but getting broader, even if you can't hold the city responsible because you had bad tap water, the EPA said it was safe to drink. So is the EPA at fault now if you do get sick after consuming something they said was safe? I don't know. Is it the rail line who should be held responsible because it was their train that derailed? But they'll point to the Railroad Safety Board who said you can get away with deferring maintenance or whatever. Presumably, they were complying with whatever regulations were in place. So is it the rail line's fault for not doing preventative maintenance in the first place that led to this derailment? Was it the labor unions who might have been fighting with the rail line that made them cut costs and maintenance so that they could save on labor costs? Is the reason that the labor unions are having to fight so hard because the rail companies are so hard on rail workers that they can barely even afford to have families? Like, much worse than other industries. It's horrible to be a railroad worker. So whose fault is it? Is it our fault because we want cheap stuff fast? And the only way you can do that is if you have this crazy approach to shipping where it's prioritizing immediate access instead of having a stockpile. So whose fault is it? Is it because God made certain things the way they are to fail at certain times?
Like planned obsolescence?
Well, that would be human, but I just mean when you're trying to place blame in a way where you can go into court and say, you're legally responsible for my baby dying, it gets really hard really fast. And I don't want to be that judge. I wonder if Congress has set up a system to adjudicate who's held responsible in these cases.
With that being said, I also understand that the pursuit of justice through these legal means can be part of an unhealthy grieving process for some people.
Yeah, the court's not going to bring your baby back.
But then on the other side of this, the government does to some degree need to be accountable. I just find it fascinating that they are so bad at doing mostly everything, but they seem to be, especially in recent years, I'm realizing, really good at covering their butts. It reminds me of qualified immunity.
Exactly.
So qualified immunity, maybe you can explain it better than I can, but it's a legal doctrine that was essentially created by the Supreme Court, and it makes it really difficult to sue government officials, particularly police officers.
Yeah, it's when if a government actor does something, you can't sue them and hold them personally responsible if they violate your rights.
Oh, so like whatever organization they belong to is the last man standing. Like the police department would be the final person, even though they're not a person, the final agency that you could sue.
I think that's right. But again, I don't even know how far you can go in suing a police department. But yeah, it's qualified immunity is supposed to protect individual government actors from civil liability for whatever they do. And there have been egregious cases in recent years where like they'll beat someone up and then not be held personally liable for that.
Do you think that policing, let's just stick to that, policing would be improved if individual police officers were held liable for their actions? If in the moment they're like, you know what, the blame will be placed on me if I do the wrong thing in this moment, that they would make better decisions overall?
I don't know, but my knee jerk is probably not, just given the experience we've had since Ferguson, Missouri. So I guess that's since 2014. There's a phenomenon called the Ferguson effect, And even with qualified immunity, people are saying, I shouldn't say people are saying, there have been some reports that suggest police are more reticent to intervene in some of these situations because they're worried even if they're not held liable in court, they're going to be held liable in the court of public opinion. And so they don't intervene in some of these situations. And it's kind of tragic because there are people that are being hurt that the police could otherwise help, and they're not. And I don't see why that would improve or why it would be any different if qualified immunity went away. I agree that qualified immunity is a problem, not just because the Supreme Court made it up and they're not lawmakers, but just the idea that you can't be held liable and you have this immunity when you're performing your government duties is a problem in a republic. Welcome to episode 13 of the Free State Podcast.
Today we are going to introduce someone that we have followed online for a little while. And sometimes I feel silly like talking about online people this in depth because I've like never met this person before in real life, and it's just, I don't know, one of these digital life experiences.
Yeah, but it's important to talk about because in this case, we're talking about Doug Wilson and Canon Press. I've gained a lot following them online.
And
their social media presence is great.
Yeah, really good. It's crazy how much things online can affect your real life and your behavior in reality, in the physical reality.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about starting my day every morning listening to Ligonier Ministries' Renewing Your Mind podcast, and then I do my devotional and read. But beyond that, just some of the content that Canon Press posts on Instagram, say, throughout the day is a good reminder. And it speaks to not just the Bible, but what's going on in the world and how to think about it in a well-grounded way.
And Doug Wilson fits into our life and our edification because we are Reformed. Yeah. And we've talked about that on the podcast before.
So we thought it would be worthwhile to talk a little bit about who he is and what we've learned from him.
And these worlds overlap a lot. The, conservative online world and Christian online world. And even I'm noticing now I'm in motherhood themed online world, and that can overlap into the others too. That one definitely gets political even more so now. Like mom content is more political now. And definitely also Christian. There's a lot of Venn diagrams in my mind. Sorry, I'm having a hard time explaining them all. But there's another page I really like called Risen Motherhood that talks about how to lean on the Lord as a mom. And one thing that they post a lot that I really like are these prayer prompts. And it's like while you're washing dishes, it's a prompt that you can pray while you're washing dishes because it, happens however many times during your day. It's a built-in part of your routine already. We could probably do a whole podcast on everything that we consume, like all the media that we consume.
We probably should. It would make us more thoughtful about it.
So sorry if this is some obscure guy, but you're going to want to know about him and you're going to want to know why so that you can respond to your mom when she comes and tells you several weeks or months from now that she heard about this guy named Doug Wilson on Tucker Carlson. There's one thing I want to say about Doug Wilson. Should we call him Pastor Doug Wilson? Doug Wilson. Before we get into it, because I don't have it written down and I don't want to forget it. Okay, it goes something like...
Do you want me to write it down or do you want to say it?
No, I'll just say it. Unless this is really choppy and then we'll try and write it down and do it again. Goes something like, the country or the world, but particularly the country, needs Doug Wilson. I just hope that he and the people he tasks to also carry his message have enough swagger to make a difference.
Why is that?
Because the influencers that seem to make a difference all have the characteristics of a leader, which are, I aspire to be like them. And it's a reality that in this culture, you have to be cool for someone to listen to you.
Yeah.
And cool by the world's standards, Not biblical standards, but the world's.
Right. Should we say who Doug Wilson is?
Yeah. Well, yeah. My mom brain was going to forget that if I didn't get it out. So thank you. So Doug Wilson is a rising star on the right.
Yeah.
So right now he's mostly among
Christian trad people.
Christian, Reformed, trad online groups.
Yeah.
But you and I saw a video on Instagram at one of Jordan Peterson's events, and he was taking questions at the end, and someone had submitted a question saying, when are you going to set up a conference with Doug Wilson?
Mm-hmm.
And Jordan Peterson indicated that he had heard of him, but didn't know much about him, and that he'll look into it.
Yeah, but was respectful enough to not just dismiss him as some cranky pastor in Idaho.
He said he's a pastor, but I can't answer the rest intellectually enough to give you anything more.
Yeah.
So we thought we would put together what we know about him, because I think we know quite a bit.
Enough to talk about.
Yeah, as a little preface for people before he really hits the scene, because I'm sure he will. I think he is the missing puzzle piece to the current roster of conservative influencers.
Which is funny. We hadn't talked about this before we started recording. There was another guy who tried to be that. He saw the popularity of people like Jordan Petersen and Joe Rogan and was upset that they weren't Christian and wanted to be the Christian equivalent and build this attractive, masculine, strong influencer profile. And that was Paul Maxwell, you remember?
Oh, I do remember him. I talked to him a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did too.
And then he spiraled.
He did. He left the faith, deleted all of his posts, and I haven't heard from him.
He might have been a bigger deal than we thought he was.
But Doug Wilson seems like he could actually be that Reformed Christian voice speaking to young men.
And the Reformed has emphasis on it. So I'm talking about the missing puzzle piece. So you have Ben Shapiro, who's Jewish, and you have Matt Walsh doing a lot of good coverage on the crazy social justice stuff in schools.
Yeah, he led the push for that new bill in Tennessee to ban trans surgeries on minors.
But he's Catholic, right?
Matt Walsh, yeah.
And then you have Jordan Petersen, who I think is experimenting with the faith.
Yeah, I think he goes to church with his wife now, but I'm not sure what denomination. Vaguely Christian.
And then you have someone like Joe Rogan, who can see some of the truths of the world, but it's through a lens that comes off just more like commonsensical. Is that a word? Commonsensical. Yeah. And kind of just a more masculine worldview, like logical, rational. This makes sense to me. Yeah, checks out.
But explicitly a non-believer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't call him a conservative, though, either, because I think...
And he rejects that, too.
He's for, socialized medicine and all that, right?
Yeah, socialized medicine, abortion. He votes libertarian in presidential years, or at least he has in recent times. But I think he still describes himself as a liberal, if you ask. I haven't listened to him as much in recent years, but I know he's friends with Jocko Willink and Tulsi Gabbard.
The way that I like to describe these people is how they would describe themselves. So I actually went to Doug Wilson's website and found a portion of his About Me page that is from his perspective how he would describe himself.
Yeah, we've been talking about a bunch of people. Let's focus on Doug.
Okay, so this is from his website. And he's talking about his blog, which is the centerpiece of his website. And he says, the point of this blog is pretty broad. Quote, all of Christ for all of life. In order to make that happen, we need, quote, theology that bites back. He says that a lot in a lot of his videos and things that he makes. I want to advance what you might call a Chestertonian Calvinism, and to bring that attitude to bear on education, sex and culture, theology, politics, book reviews, postmodernism, expository studies, along with other random tidbits that come into my head. My perspective is usually not hard to discern. In theology, I am an evangelical, postmill, Calvinist, Reformed, and Presbyterian, pretty much in that order. In politics, I am slightly to the right of Jeb Stuart, asterisk. You're going to have to tell me who that is after I finish this because I don't know who that is. In my cultural sympathies, if we were comparing the blight of postmodernism to a vast but shallow goo pond, I would observe that I have spent many years on these stilts and have barely gotten any of it on me. I, one point, really like his writing style. It's very smart in the most intellectual use of that word.
Yes, he's a very good writer.
It's quippy and funny, but very direct and to the point, very like Hemingworth style.
Hemingway.
Or what did I say?
Hemingsworth.
Who's that?
No, I don't know.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, Hemingway and Wordsworth. You probably put them together.
I don't know.
But I think those are opposite styles.
I think you're being too generous. I think I just misspoke. Okay, who's Jeb Stuart?
So, I have a little bit of history with Jeb Stuart. When we lived in Falls Church and I was working for Real Clear Investigations, that was around the time, I don't know if it was it was post-Ferguson, but pre-George Floyd. There was still a bunch of debates about renaming schools, getting rid of Confederate monuments, etc. Jeb Stuart is a Confederate general, was. And the middle school next to our house was named after him. I think it was a middle school. It might have been a high school.
So he's slightly to the right of a Confederate?
That is what Doug Wilson said.
That's surely not what he means.
I hope not. So I helped do a story at Real Clear Investigations about when they renamed that school that was named after Stewart to like Justice High School. I had to go take a picture of the sign and everything. Well, and so this is a question about Doug Wilson, right? He's a pastor in Idaho.
Maybe it's a joke.
I don't think it is. And I was listening to a lecture he gave on raising kids. And he was bragging about how his daughter was in school and they were making fun of her because she defended the Confederacy in some context. He was very vague. So I hope he's not one of those libertarians who read too much Tom DeLorenzo, who thinks Lincoln was a tyrant and just had a knee-jerk overreaction. But if I had to explain why he would write something like that, I think it's that. If I had to guess, he's probably more anti-Lincoln than he is pro-Confederacy, because nothing else I've seen from him makes sense in that context.
Can we just say, like, for the class, that secession was about slavery, not about states' rights, and states don't have rights, they have powers. People have rights.
Yeah, and if you want to go beyond the slogan, if you need a way to back that up with historical data, you look at all of the secession statements from the states that left the Union. The one thing they all have in common is slavery.
They said it themselves. So
they did, in their own words. Don't take my word for it. You go and look. Every single one said it was about slavery. There were other issues involved, but the one thing they all had in common was slavery.
Okay. I mean, are we covering red flags first? I have another red flag.
I have one in mind, and I think it's the same one, but let's let it come out naturally. What were you going to say next, just about him in general?
So I don't want to be unfair here, because the reason that Doug Wilson, I mean, I'll just keep using this phrase, to me is the missing puzzle piece to this conservative roster is not because of his politics. It's because of his theology. Yeah. So if there are weak spots in his politics, I will forgive them almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean, you had one in mind. He wrote a whole book about an issue that you care about.
Yeah, my libertarian, like, knee-jerk reaction here. He wrote a book called Devoured by Cannabis. Now, I haven't read it. This was just a red flag for me when I was really trying to solidify my background on Doug Wilson. And so he wrote this book, Devoured by Cannabis, and it's basically what he calls the Christian response to the effort to legalize marijuana. And I will just read what he has written on the back of his book that basically summarizes what he's getting at. Many conservatives are ready to give up on fighting against the legalization of marijuana. Quote, hasn't the war on drugs been a complete failure, they ask? And libertarians turn this surrender into a virtue. Quote, people should be free to do what they want as long as they're not hurting anyone. But as Christians, we must be ready to swim against the tide even when it's no longer cool. Parentheses, and no, we don't do it by making unsubstantiated claims about reefer madness. That's funny. I get it. I appreciate the last sentence. My first reaction to this was, But as a Christian, are you ready to respond to people being thrown into jail for having a small amount of recreational marijuana on them that they use medicinally? That seems like an unfair punishment. And so he's saying libertarians turn the fight against the war on drugs into a virtue, but that's not the virtue for me. The virtue is forgiveness and humane punishments, like punishments that fit the crime.
Yeah. And a lot of his argument has to do with there's no way to, in his mind, to use marijuana in moderation.
Yeah, there's another quote from the book, and it says, marijuana alters the mind, unlike alcohol, tobacco, and nicotine. But the other thing about marijuana is that it can be used in a medicinal application, unlike alcohol and tobacco.
Right. And so reading the back of his book, it seems to lack a little bit of nuance. But if you had to be nuanced about everything you said, no one would say anything, right?
Right. And that's why I'm saying I'm very forgiving of the political failings here, if that's what they may be. But I get the impression that his politics are very fit his age, shall I say.
He's an older guy.
I know very few boomers who are pro legalization until they're like, they see the CBD commercials on Fox News and like, man, I tried that stuff and it helped me go to sleep real quick. So, I mean, I'm willing to forgive a lot of that. It's just important to note that when you're talking about him coming into the fold of people who are influencing how the rest of us live their lives or choose our political leaders, etc.
Yeah. And I wouldn't, of course, the marijuana issue is not a make or break. It just lets you understand how he thinks about emerging issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one hot button.
I know a lot of people from his generation too see it wasn't about slavery, it was about culture, or when talking about the Civil War.
Yeah,
it's like
right.
a strong, hard position to, but you know what, like I spank my kids, I'm tough. It's just another one of those.
You mean the war between the states? They'll call it that instead of the Civil War.
I've never heard that.
Oh, yeah. You'll get a lot of... So in the critical race theory debate, that's part of when they say you're not teaching about the Civil War or slavery. That's one fact that some of those proponents will throw out. They'll say, well, in some schools in the South, they don't even call it the Civil War.
Is that true?
Yeah. I had a teacher, I remember in 7th grade, I had a teacher who called it that, and I was confused because I had never heard it called that before. But yeah, there are some teachers who do that.
Wow, I guess I'm a libtard now because I didn't know that. That's crazy.
You're just a Yankee, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Noted. Doug Wilson isn't just a pastor, though. He also has Canon Press.
It's associated with his church, yeah.
Okay. And Canon Press is like the publishing arm.
Yeah, I like their slogan.
Googling. Saving the world starts with you.
No. Outfitters of the Reformation.
Oh, that's cool. It's like LL Bean kind of vibes.
Kind of, though.
Like rugged. What were you going to say?
No, the subhead is all the books at Canon Press equip you to say, thy kingdom come, and to live like that is actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
So the point being, the books that this press publishes are not just theoretical, pie-in-the-sky, pietist. Oh, this is what I think about this random verse in the Bible that might have no bearing on your life. They're trying not to make the gospel relevant, but to give you practical Christian advice.
Intellectual tools in your tool belt.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it.
Yeah. Theologically rigorous, but still practical.
Mm-hmm.
I especially like their app. So like everybody else, Canon has an app, Canon Plus. Tons of audiobooks on there, and not just their own stuff. They have the licenses to things like Moby Dick and The Great Gatsby. So you can listen to classic American literature on there too.
And his son has a show on Netflix, right?
Yeah, he wrote a book, a children's book called Hello Ninja, and it got adapted into a cool Netflix show.
Yeah, that's a big deal. We watch it. We really like it.
Yeah, toddler likes it.
And it's not like, how do I say this? What's that movie that's in theaters right now? The Jesus Revolution.
Right. It's important that you bring that up. I listened to N.D. Wilson's podcast. Doug Wilson's son has his own podcast talking about stories.
This is pretty meta.
It's called Stories Are Soul Food. And he talks about his approach to writing. He's a fiction writer. And he's a Christian writing fiction. He's not trying to write Christian fiction.
I like that.
And so some of his characters might be Christians and they might pray.
Mm-hmm.
But if it doesn't fit in the story, he's not going to shove in a Bible verse.
Right.
And so his content is wholesome. That doesn't mean he doesn't address scary or violent themes.
Mm-hmm.
But he does so from a Christian worldview. So Hello Ninja is cool, but it's not VeggieTales.
Right. VeggieTales got bought too. It's not the old VeggieTales. Is that right?
Yeah. In recent years, I heard it was either on Netflix or another channel, and it was just generic kids programming, not Christian. But I think it's recently become Christian again.
There's been a revival of VeggieTales.
I'm not following it closely, but that's my understanding.
I've turned it on for the toddler before, but I go to YouTube and then I search for before a certain date. We've done this with movies before.
Yeah. That's
2000, safer. 2010 is right after that is where it got pretty gay.
People are talking about the censorship of the Roald Dahl books. So James and the Giant Peach, Matilda,
Love
Charlie
those.
and the Chocolate Factory.
Mm-hmm. You know that was our wedding song, right? He's like, the one that we walked down the aisle to was the song that they played in Matilda.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
I can't even see. I'm bad too. I can't even remember the name of it, but it's like the dun 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 dun. It makes you feel happy. I don't know. Rusted Root. That's it. That's the band. And I can't.
Dun, 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 dun,
yeah,
dun,
that.
dun.
There. We're obviously singers, but that's what we went after we were married. That's what we walked back down the aisle to.
The recessional.
Oh yes, husband and wife. That was yeah.
I associated that
and
with
that was
Friends.
sorry, that was in Matilda.
Okay.
Oh, is it also in Friends?
I think so. I mean, it's a very 90s.
I think people mostly associate it with Matilda.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah. Side note.
But someone was commenting on that whole story saying basically any book published after 1985 or republished after 1985, you got to be careful. And then especially as books are going more and more digital, like if we eventually get the boys' iPads with books on them,
yeah, I don't
we
know
have
about
to
that.
be we have to be careful because a Kindle book they can just edit and you won't even know.
What's that called in 1984? It's double speak, but they go back and
Yeah, they just revise old
change.
stuff.
There's another book, and we have basically decided to not address it on this podcast.
Oh,
We're gonna save it for another book or another podcast.
One reason you might have heard of Doug Wilson and Canon Press recently is they published a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism. And that's been a big debate ever since January 6th. A lot of the media has been calling those protesters Christian nationalists or white Christian nationalists. And so the idea that a somewhat respectable press would publish a book defending that idea caused some controversy.
Yeah, we'll go into that more on another day.
Yeah, we're running long here.
But I think Canon Press and so Doug Wilson necessary, Canon Press also necessary. For years people have talked about, well, liberal elites own media, they own comedy, they're all over the place. We need conservatives to do the same thing, and it's all just talk because nobody's ever been actually good at it.
Yeah, usually the attempts to do that or to do
super cringe.
Yeah, super cringe, a conservative version of something that's bad. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying to replace it.
And I think that's the problem, is that they go after these things trying to be the conservative or the Christian alternative. And like you were talking about with Hello Ninja, you just need to make a good product.
Yeah.
And it can be Christian in nature, but it doesn't need to be overtly so. And it's not that you're trying to hide that aspect of it. That's just not what you're leading with. And more people are going to watch it.
Yeah, and different people are called to different things. I was listening to Doug Wilson's son's podcast before, and he talked about this.
Does he have a name? We should probably call.
Well, so I keep going back and forth. I've heard people refer to him as Nate, but on the book, it's N.D. Wilson. So I don't know if he goes by his initials.
Or maybe he just goes by Doug Wilson's son. That's fine.
Anyway, on the Stories
Sorry,
Are Soul
Nate.
on the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, he was talking about the fact that Christian audiences are sometimes the worst because they'll read his stuff and expect it to be a Bible story every time, and when it's not, he gets tons of hate mail.
Yeah.
But I would wager magnitudes more people are reading and watching his content compared to the other explicitly Christian stuff out there.
Definitely. Having worked in media, I can tell you for a fact, female audience members, like those who are watching TV, are overwhelmingly more critical and like mean about it to other women on air about like the way that they look, about the way that they dress or speak.
That checks.
All the complaints, comments, all of it. It's all women on women crime.
Yeah, I can't imagine commenting on a video, much less
about a
going out
woman's, yeah.
No, at all, but then much less about someone's appearance.
But it's so irony because the women doing that are going to be the same ones that go on to some other video and they're going to be like, yes, queen, slay, about some feminist, you know, girl boss stuff. It's everyone's lost. So one of the things that we did to prepare to talk about Doug Wilson in the context of being a rising star, you might, I don't know how he'll break through. Maybe Jordan Petersen will have a video conference with him. Or
Well, I know his church got a lot of publicity during the pandemic because they stayed open. They protested some of the lockdowns. They're in a college town in Idaho. And I remember there was a specific, I think it was ABC News, did an interview with him saying, "Oh, you believe the Bible? That's weird." And he said, "Yes."
I appreciate that. That's good swagger.
Mm-hmm.
Like
He's got swagger.
direct.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay, well, that I guess that's for you to define. When I think of swagger, I think of someone who knows what they believe and is not afraid to say it forthrightly. Like Jordan Petersen in all those combative interviews, he says what he thinks is true. He's not arrogant about it. If he's wrong, he'll admit he's wrong, but he's not so afraid of being controversial that he won't say what he thinks is true.
I agree with that as like a traditional definition, but when you're talking about applying it to culture today, you need more than that. You need to physically be swaggy. Like you need to be, so Jordan Petersen among some online cultures now has like this zaddy appeal.
Yeah. People find him sexually attractive is what you're saying.
I'm not saying I'm a part of that group, but you can tell that he takes care of himself.
Yeah.
And that includes physically.
He dresses well. He eats well. Yeah.
And that's something that a young man, which is his primary audience, will look at and say, listen, this guy not only has it all together in his mind and in his life, but like physically too. He knows what he's doing and he's sticking to a certain set of principles, and that's admirable. I want to be like that in the wholest sense possible. And I think that's why he's so popular.
Yeah, and maybe that's why Joe Rogan is the #1 podcaster in the world, despite being shorter than me, because he's super fit and super charismatic and has that swagger like we're talking about. So are you saying that's a red flag with Doug Wilson? For those of you who haven't Googled him, he's portly. And we got to be careful because Biden just...
I don't want to put him down. He's a good guy.
He's a really good guy. We're talking about what would contribute to swagger.
And I think that it is somewhat unfortunate that this matters so much, but it's just the state of reality.
No, we live in a visual era. We're talking about our podcast. We hate that we're not on video yet. We're waiting for a dedicated filming space before we can get a camera set up.
I imagine his wife makes really good meals. Actually, his website said that he was the chief chef in their house. So,
Well, and you can't trust a skinny cook.
it's true. So, yeah, maybe we're the ones who are wrong.
And that's fine. But when you're talking about a masculine ideal, I don't know anyone who would aspire to look like him, even if he wanted his mind.
That's a great way of saying it. So the thing that we did to prepare for this interview was we watched a response video where Doug Wilson was responding to Jordan Petersen talk to the Christian church and tell the Christian church how they can recruit more young men as members. Doug's initial response was directed not so specifically at this video, but to Jordan Petersen's teachings as a whole. He said Jordan Petersen does really good, quote, straight talk from a crooked foundation. And I liked that a lot. Thought that was a really succinct way of pointing out the flaw with JP. Can we call him that?
For our Catholic friends,
It's
that's
better.
Jordan Petersen, not the Pope.
It's better than Zaddy. So Jordan Petersen's whole thing is giving life advice.
Yeah.
And he gets down to the very particular finite ways that you can improve yourself and your experiences.
Yeah, make your bed.
But one is going to wonder, how do I know that this advice is legit? What is the source of it? How do I know that it's true? Because if all of this is for naught, then Jordan Petersen is a fraud.
Yeah, the initial appeal is you have this authoritatively speaking guy who seems generally trustworthy, but then once you've thought about it for a minute, okay, well, where is he getting these ideas? Why should I trust him beyond this really good packaging? He's really persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, once you take a step back, okay, well, what's the grounding of this? He talks about Jungian psychology. Well, what's that? Should I trust that? What else is going on here?
And so that's where I think we desperately need a Doug Wilson supplement to say, well, he had this other quote while he was watching this video from Jordan Petersen. And he said, even without orthodoxy, Petersen can glimpse the truth and speak it in a way that people listen. And he agrees you have to win the young men to win the young women, the children, the culture, the world. But there's a conflict between these two. I don't know if this was my note or his, but Petersen's advice has a chief end of self-betterment, but the Christian faith's chief end is to glorify God, and a lot of the times through self-sacrifice.
Yeah, I don't think that was your note. That's from the Westminster Confession.
Well, maybe I'm just repeating the Westminster Confession. Maybe I've absorbed it well enough.
That's the job, right?
So I can foresee a conflict that some of Jordan Petersen's fans may not like. And that is, yes, I should make my bed. Yes, I should exercise and make my body look good. Yes, I should work to make myself desirable so that I can attain a girlfriend and a wife. But what about when those things don't make you look or feel better, but they are for the glory of God? Doug Wilson is going to say you need to do them anyways. You are called to do them anyways.
Yeah, there's a higher calling on your life. You are not your own. And Jordan Petersen talks about things being bigger than you, but why do you have a duty to society or other people if there is no God, if there is no lawgiver? That's true. And it reminds me, this might be too abstract, so stop me if you fall asleep, but it reminds me of the debate in Aristotle's Ethics about courage. And the courage being the moderate place, the virtue between being foolhardy and rushing into battle without thinking and getting yourself killed, and being a coward. So courage would be the moderation of those two extremes. And there's a part where he talks about you can still be called to sacrifice yourself for the good of the city, even though that's not good for you personally.
Mm-hmm.
At least initially. It's good in a different way. It's noble, but you're dead, so what is that good for you? Under Jordan Petersen's analysis, I don't know where the space for that heroism comes from. And he might have it. I don't know Jung enough. Maybe that's one of the archetypes, is the hero that sacrifices himself. But why? Doug Wilson would say God has a plan for your life and you have to submit to God, even if that means
laying down your life.
Laying down your life, but specifically in response to the state, like speaking the truth to power or whatever. that might lead you to be executed, but
Or even
that can still be
something
good.
less sexy than that. Maybe you're called to ministry and you're not meant to make $250,000 and you can't live in a giant house that looks good on Instagram. Maybe that's what you're called to do.
Yeah. Or maybe you're called to educate your kids. And so you're not going to be a dual income family with 2 kids in daycare.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about red flags. In last episode, we talked about the red pill.
Mm-hmm.
Early on Reddit, there was a forum, and it was a bunch of those incel pickup artist types. And I'm pretty sure Doug Wilson used to be popular in that crowd. And we can talk about another criticism you had of him along those lines. Sometimes he has marriage and family advice that's excellent, and sometimes it's frustrating.
Now, I'll preface this with saying I can see how it would be very easy to pick like an example or a metaphor that's a little sloppy. And he has on his websites like examples of where he's done that and he's come clean and he's asked for forgiveness and apologized and said, I was wrong. And so that's cool. But there was one where he posted that a wife's hair is an indication of how well her husband is managing the home.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, are you kidding me, Doug? You're putting that standard on my back? Like, I take care of 2 kids, 3 and under. They're both sick right now. My hair is wet in a messy bun. And Jace is a great husband. So please do not measure him in that way. Of course, I don't know, possibly primed to be defensive because I'm in a very particularly challenging part of motherhood and womanhood just with young children. And so maybe in a general sense that could apply to some degree. I don't like it.
Yeah, maybe he's talking to the moms whose kids are at school all day.
Yeah, like obviously you need to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Feed yourself well, take care of your body. But I, as a hard and fast rule, don't like the hair thing.
Yeah, it was strange.
It was sloppy.
But it caught our attention.
Yeah, that's true. But if you're trying to reinforce biblical truths, just speak the truth. Don't try and dress it up.
Yeah, it's not a biblical principle that your hair needs to be hot.
Yeah.
To go back to that reaction video Doug had to Jordan Petersen, he was saying you can't call someone into a rigorous life of the mind without having them read the book, in this case the Bible, that you're telling them to give themselves to. Mm-hmm. And so when Jordan Peterson's encouraging these young men to take care of their minds, to take responsibility for their world, they're going to ask these fundamental questions, and that's why it's important to have a perspective like Doug Wilson, who's been thinking about the same issues that Jordan Peterson's talking about from an explicitly Reformed perspective. Mm-hmm. And then he made the Protestant church, he called the Protestant church out in a way that all Doug Wilson could say was, ouch.
Quote, the Protestants have all of the instruments to do the thing that Jordan is calling us to do, but we have stored them in the basement and we haven't hauled them out for centuries.
It's true. The evangelical churches that I've known and been around are so worried about getting people in the door and not offending you. Like I've heard one of my family members' churches doesn't do weddings anymore because they don't want to have to turn away a couple that they don't want to do a ceremony for, so they don't do any.
Cool.
That kind of leadership is what Jordan Peterson's calling out. The reason men aren't going to church anymore is because you don't have the courage of your convictions. If you believe this stuff is true, you need to act like it, and you need to actually say it.
Yeah, too many of them are wearing skinny jeans on their legs and in their minds. And in their relationship with God, it's just, ugh.
That'll tweet.
Yeah, thanks. I thought about it for a little bit.
Even if there is some truth coming out of the pulpit, it's in this stunted way that isn't having that effect, like what Doug Wilson said, all of Christ for all of life. It's all of Christ on Sunday morning, and then it's just about the nice stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think Doug Wilson could be a force for good in the culture if we get people taking Christ seriously again, not just on Sunday morning. That would be better than if they got their life advice exclusively from Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson.
I'm sitting here trying to think how to not sound anti-Catholic.
You don't think trad caths have the way forward?
No, because they're wrong. And I'm trying to imagine, I think something super healthy for conservative circles would be a debate between, let's set it up now, let's predict it, Ben Shapiro, not necessarily Matt Walsh, because I don't think he's like,
An integralist?
I don't know what that means.
Like the Pope in charge of the government?
Oh, is he that way?
I don't think so. There are people who want the Catholic...
No, there'd be a lot of people that want the Pope to run for president. Yeah. Anyways, so I'd like to see a debate between like maybe Ben Shapiro and Doug Wilson, or I'm trying to think of someone Catholic, Matt Walsh, level influencer, have a debate with Doug Wilson and wait until he pwns all of them. It would be the greatest day of my life.
Yeah, we'd watch that.
Yeah.
I'd be more excited for that. I was listening to someone talk about how important the State of the Union is in political journalism, but I couldn't care less about watching the State of the Union. I would stay up to watch Ben Shapiro debate Doug Wilson or Matt Walsh debate.
Yeah, 10 times out of 10.
And that's why we're Christian nationalists.